Go ahead and get our work session for May 14th, 2025 underway, and I'll pass it on to Director Buettner.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Twait. We'll get started. So thanks for coming out tonight, commissioners, members of the public. One thing that you asked me to do earlier in the year is to start to look at our conditional use permit process from start to finish and kind of look where there might be some improvements. So I only have a few slides. I'm not going to bore you with PowerPoint, but just want to point out some facts of what we do have. We do have an interactive map that we can look at if you want as well throughout this discussion. Things that are on the presentation, they may be proposals, they may be suggestions. They are not final in any way, shape, or form. Ultimately, that power would rest with you guys and/or council, depending on what ultimately would be done. But really more just as a conversation starter to see how potential ways to improve the conditional use permit, both from the issuance side and then on the implementation side as well. Hey, that actually works for me. A lot of text. I promise the rest isn't as bad. But we do seek to ease the development throughout the city. We want people to live here, to work here, to thrive here. We don't want to have a lot of onerous regulations if they're not necessarily warranted. But at the same time, we do want to make sure there's guardrails to make sure that people are treating their neighbors, respectfully. You don't necessarily want to be living next to a salvage yard, if you bought a nice single family house. So trying to strike that balance. So per the code, planning and zoning staff, myself and my staff, we monitor all active conditional use permits. Where there were a lot of CUPs kind of clustered, and you'll see on the map, we decided to look into what the type and longevity. How long have these CUPs been in place? Are they brand new? Some have been since the late 90s. We just kind of want to get a feel for what's going on in the city. And then when there were areas of similar CUPs where a lot of the uses are similar or adjacent to each other, does it make sense potentially where that development has already happened? It may not conform to the zoning of the district as it stands. Does it constitute potentially looking at rezoning? Does it constitute, we don't, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but we wanted to look at all our options because if we keep granting exceptions, at what point do the exceptions become the rule? So you see throughout the city, there are a lot of conditional use permits. Some are clustered, some are kind of spread out. Some are self-explanatory, some are related to each other. This map is interactive, not on the slideshow, but we do have it pulled up. Some, as you'll see, with our friends, so we have the golf course is one, the racetrack, obviously. You don't necessarily want racetracks going willy-nilly through your town. But a lot of them are a lot of small businesses. As you'll see, there's some, I guess it doesn't work on the screen. Redoubt has a handful. There are some like on South Spruce heading towards the beach. Angler Drive, as you know, has several. But there's other places throughout town that they've been popping up. So this is a breakdown by type. I moved the public and the miscellaneous together, not to skew any numbers or anything, but because they were there's a whole host of what those are. But the ones that really stood out, separate from the public ones, were residential and commercial areas having a lot of CUPs in them. So as you see, these are the uses that are allowed in these per the land use table per code. So the purple is principally permitted. So in residential, there's about 100, just over 100 principal permitted uses. Generally, your 1, 2, 3, 4 family dwellings and such. A lot more conditional, which is the green one, which you see both in residential and the industrial and public. Not permitted is the blue. So you see commercial is actually one of our more restrictive. You can do certain things, but you can't do certain things in commercial. And then secondary, if you have a primary use and you have some secondary uses may be allowed. So like in commercial, you can have residential in the same building if potentially, as long as that primary use. So if you had like ground level retail and then had an apartment above it, that technically would be allowed in certain commercial areas throughout town. So that's what the secondary is. But what really blew our mind when we looked at this, looking at our land use table, which is about 7 pages long, there are 549 potential conditional uses in that land use table. So the letter C shows up a lot. The next most is 362 not permitted uses and 308 permitted uses where you don't need any kind of conditional use. So there's a lot of maybes out there. And that, when we looked at it, that was an eye-popping number. Because, and that could be like where there are certain ones like funeral homes, for instance, is conditional throughout the city. So there are several instances where one use could be conditional in many different zoning codes. So one thing when we get into it as a possible suggestion would be to review the land use table to start kind of sorting out where things may or may not fit best. You're still giving people flexibility, but there's a lot more maybes than yeses or nos, and that sometimes can stymie development because it makes it harder for someone to say, yes, I can do this in Kenai, versus, yes, I can, no, I can't, or I have to ask permission. And we want to be able to help streamline some of that process. Out of our current mix of uses, we have some that are hidden, so thank God I printed them. Little zoom bar. Okay. So the big one on the right is 24%. That's your guides, lodging, cabin. Right now we're using cabin rentals as short-term rentals as well, basically Airbnbs, because we don't have a true definition in our zoning code right now to allow short-term rentals. But the definition of cabin rentals is pretty close. It's a detached dwelling for rentals less than 30 days. So that's, to us, it would include what would be considered a short-term rental. 9% PUDs, planned use developments, so that's more like Kenai Landing area. I think that's where most of those are. Some are residential, so allowing for more intensive development than the zoning calls for. This is a big one, and we have something in our other meeting, but where we're putting in low income and senior housing, sometimes you have more than 4 units. Right now they're in rural residential. They're going to be seeking a rezone in the future. I've already got a letter from them, but this would allow them to have 5, 6, or 7 units in the rural residential zone. Childcare in schools, like Boys and Girls Club, they have one. So stuff like that, where they're not in an educational district. Natural resources, this is going to be your gravel pits, anything like that. Any oil pads, pipelines, that's any kind of like that would be under natural resources. Mixed use, so generally commercial residential mixes. Again, some of that's near like Kenai Landing, where you might be living over a potential shop or something like that. Restaurants and others, I think there's only one, and it's in the town site, historic district. And then marijuana is another big one that's conditional and restrictive as to where it could be, and our RV parks. So this is kind of a breakdown of where we're at, but the big one, the big whale in the room, I would say would probably be the guides, lodging, cabins, and the residential. Put together, that's solidly over a third of our CUPs that we have right now. My dog made it into the slideshow, so because we had to. But right now we have 92 active CUPs. Approximately a quarter go, like I said, to lodging, cabin rentals, and guides. A little less than a quarter go to natural resource extraction or marijuana. So I kind of merged some to some of those. It probably is appropriate to keep a CUP in place for all those, not just now, but going forward, because it's kind of a case by case. And then 11% are residential, and again, those are larger developments, so the number of units. So this is where some of the proposals, these are not final in any way, shape, or form. These are really just a spurred discussion. So nothing you see on here is suggested that we adopt now right now, even in the future, this would be something we would workshop through to see what would be appropriate. This is the end of the Kenai River. As you see, the north part of the peninsula where it's light green, some of these, since the city owns it, we may be pushing ahead with these a little bit sooner. That whole north end of the peninsula is in the floodplain, and no development can happen anyways. So something like that we would recommend into conservation. The way it benefits the CUP is down a step away. That dot just towards the end, there is an airstrip there for, I believe PRL owns that landing strip. It's not a big airport. I think it's like right on the beach. That's allowable in conservation. So, zoning it in conservation would be, we think would be appropriate. And also most of that area where we've changed the color is in the floodplain, including part of that landing strip. So no new development. Development's there. It can be there, gets grandfathered in. Anything else, nothing new can go in. And that's what the new maps that we adopted at the beginning of the year. And the same thing with the flats over off bridge access, kind of where that overlook is. Same reason, is all in the floodplain. So can't develop it. Doesn't make sense to have it advertised as rural residential when no one can actually live there. And even if you were to build out of the floodplain, which is technically possible, as a floodplain administrator, I'd probably advise against it, because all it would take is one good earthquake to really shake that foundation. It's going to turn to liquid and sink and just be a mess. So erring on the side of caution, that's probably something else. But as you see, some other changes have happened. So there are significant, they're overlapped on this current map, but to the right on the peninsula is where Kenai Landing is. They have several CUPs overlapping on the same parcel. We've already talked to that property owner, and they're actually already talking with us to potentially rezone that to working waterfront, which is a new zone that just got passed because it fits more with what they're already doing. Other areas, there's some other landowners in that area that own some other adjacent parcels and parcels very close that we've also started to reach out to, and for the same reason. They have a lot of the CUPs that already fit more in working waterfront, not an industrial setting, and may spur future development if it's easier to go in without having to get a CUP for. Everything I just said, but in small words. Do anything big? So the bottom one I'll bring to your attention is the south of that proposed conservation land out on the actual peninsula. They have a lot of CUPs for condominiums, restaurant, bars, food vendors, commercial recreation, bakery, like good mix of services. That actually does already fit in our working waterfront. RV parks are still conditional use over there, but they would drop from having 7 to like 1. So it would make their burden at the end of the year for the end of year report a lot less, while they're already doing everything else they're saying they're doing. And it would mimic the opposite side of along bridge access that's already been rezoned, because ultimately the goal is, should industrial development not go in, which the development patterns aren't very favorable at this time, but doesn't mean it can't change. We would seek to revitalize and actually enjoy the river, get down there, and not every city is blessed to have the views that we have, and we want people to go down there and enjoy it, and hopefully spend a couple of dollars while they're down there. Another place that we were looking at, again, this is just a spur conversation, was along Redoubt. We have some very large tracts of land. The large 160, the big square to the right in the current is owned by the Kenichi Indian tribe. There's a private owner for the slightly large green one that's surrounded by blue. The massive green one to the left, most of that is owned by the city of Kenai. We're in your next meeting is actually a consideration for some subdivision of that area. But all those red dots on the bottom, right along Redoubt, all of those are for Kenai Peninsula Housing Initiative, KPHI. They're the ones putting in low income and senior housing along there, and they're a little bit more intensive because rural residential really is restrictive on what you can actually put in there. So as you see in our proposed Can I see we're going to be in discussions? I put it as urban residential to make it the least restrictive for them. I want to talk with them. It may be appropriate to potentially even come up with a new zoning district for some of their lands, because their mix of uses may be different than what you would see elsewhere in the city. But we want them to be able to enjoy their land to the best of their ability. But other places along Redoubt, we're also looking at making it urban residential directly on Redoubt, and then everything else that's behind it, rezoning it to suburban residential, one to match kind of the rest of the area. And it doesn't preclude them from developing a large homestead. So like this large green parcel is owned by one owner. If they want to develop it as one large kind of homestead, they can, but they can't make anything smaller. And so when developers are looking at this large tract of land between the Inlet Woods area and the area off First and Second, right now, any future proposed developments would have to have very large, like 20,000 square foot lots. And it may not pencil out to get enough homes back there to make it worth them buying it, building it, and selling. So, but that doesn't mean they have to be the minimum lot size as well. So they could have slightly larger lots than the bare minimum in suburban residential, but they can't go the other way around if they're, so we think it would make it a little bit more marketable for us to get development, especially knowing that housing is a need, and that area already has water and sewer run to it. It would need some extensions, but the bones are there for a decent sized development. Whether it looks like the one to the left or the right, that's up to a developer, but we want to make sure that we want to say that we're open for business. Everything I just said, but again, in small words. And these will also be posted. They weren't finalized before this, so that's why I didn't have a copy. I also have a packet here, so if you want to look at it as well. But again, the 6-unit developments for senior citizens, low income, they have plans for potentially even bigger, like 7 or 8 units with the new funding that they just got. We want to work with the Canarsie Indian Tribe, like I mentioned, for their larger development. And the land uses along the north side of Redoubt have just generally, as they've developed, typically been more dense in nature, 4-plexes, 5-plexes. There are a few single-family homes, and those wouldn't be touched. Anything that is already there would just become non-conforming if it doesn't actually fit in terms of lot size or what's there. But we think urban residential allows you to have something, maybe apartment buildings or something like that on the front, and then ease your way into the neighborhood, so you don't have, because as things go in, Redoubt will get a little bit busier. It'll become more like Forest with a little more traffic, and you don't want all that traffic noise bleeding into, a quieter, more suburban type neighborhood. Fun one. So Engler Drive is another hotspot where we have a significant number of CUPs. We don't have, we specifically did not put a proposed map because we don't know what the best course of action is here, and that would be something we wanted to discuss. But there are potential ways that landowners could go about it, P&Z could consider. Does it make sense to rezone a piece of it? That would be up for consideration potentially. Would it be, where the CUPs are, would that be working waterfront in a way? We don't know if that's the best way, but we just want to throw that. Would rural residential 1, because there are also landowners in the area that don't want any additional CUPs in that area, and RR1, which is what the district just to the north, I want to say that's Ames, if I'm not mistaken. It's also RR1, and that would be more restrictive. So there's several different ways. It really is what do landowners want? What do we think the city is? What does the city think is best? I don't have all the answers. That's why I'm bringing it for consideration. But at this point, there's actually, I think I have numbers. So starting as far back as I could find, there could be some that have come and gone. But of the active ones, the oldest ones are from 1988, which means for 37 years, roughly, they've been functioning in this form. And then it really increased in the 2000s You just saw the numbers start really ramping up. So there's currently 21 active conditional use permits just on the east side of the road. This doesn't include the west side. I just wanted to look what's directly on that creek right on the river. 9 are guide services, 6 are lodges, 2 are considered bed and breakfast, 2 cabin rentals, 1 hotel, and 1 private RV park. So where those developments have already happened, where this is where I said sometimes the exception has become the norm, and especially on the north end of Angler, this kind of development has become the norm, good, bad, or otherwise. But how do we want to proceed going forward? And that was the official presentation, but I wanted to, if you'll allow Chairman to just kind of open up for a dialogue. We have members of the public, members of the commission, really to see what our thoughts are, because this obviously won't be the be-all, end-all of the conditional use permits, but trying to get some direction so that I can put together some more thoughts, some more, take people's thoughts and feelings into consideration so that as we move through this, I can come up with recommendations to bring back to you for consideration as we navigate.
So the first question I have, I guess, and it kind of relates mostly probably to Angler. There's no rule of thumb or anything in code that says, well, we've got too many conditional use permits in here. Somebody comes down there or buys something there and wants to apply for one. We can't turn it down because there's already a bunch of them in there. That's not really the way to do it, correct?
That is correct. Sorry. In the city, we do not have caps on them. We do, depending on the zoning district is what will dictate what is allowed, conditional or not allowed by right. So that's why one of the potential suggestions would be, is it appropriate to rezone to either restrict it and say no from the front end, yes from the front end, or some semblance of both.
I think that was what people wanted, and that was kind of an argument regarding it, to the point where they said, well, maybe it just needs to be rezoned because there's so many of them down there. But like I said, I didn't remember there was anything saying, well, you're denied because we already have 2/3 of them are already conditional use or something like that. So
There's no language like that for the conditional uses. Doesn't mean it can't be. If that could also be a suggestion, is capping the number of conditional use permits in a subdivision, or it'd have to be something measurable. We might not want to say citywide, yeah, as the city grows and develops, but a lot of these are in certain subdivisions, like as it's platted, so that could be on the table.
well, I know these guys back here have a great amount of knowledge with Angler and all that, so I don't know if you guys want to chime in on anything.
On free form, not
Yep,
3
absolutely.
minutes.
Yep, no, since we're a nice little intimate group, we'll let her run.
So, my name is MJ Loveland. I live on the adjacent property to 1005 Angler there, 945 Ames Road. And I kind of thought we were going to talk about maybe code changes to the conditional use permit process rather than changing the zones themselves. But there's probably, I'm going to guess, a dozen residents, full-time residents on Angler Road. They would not want you to change the zone to active waterfront. I mean, we're adjacent to them, and there are a ton of conditional use permits on that road, and I recognize that. But there are a few residents that have been there forever that it's been pushed through a few times, and it's failed. Sorry, I thought I had it on.
Is red on or red off?
Red is on.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So that was my point with that, but I'll let him go on a little bit, but I'm gonna turn it on again. Tell him who you are.
We spent some time going over this, and as Jeff well knows, we've been here many times, and we have some interaction with it. I guess the number one thing I would like to say as far as conditional use permits is that it's a request to not follow the zoning requirements area according to the master plan and the land use, plan, right? I mean, we got to understand that it's a request to not follow the rules, to paraphrase it. And so that said, that's why, okay, you got a bunch of conditional use permits clustered, but rezoning is not necessarily the activity. The reason they have the ability to get a conditional use permit is to let you not follow the rules. And that said, it's a perfect segue into one of the biggest things that I think is a challenge with the conditional use permit process is that we have limited oversight. We have no enforcement, we have no inspection, we have no way to do that. And so most of the people, I mean, I know a goodly number of people who have conditional use permits, and they follow the rules. They follow the rules, the conditional use permit process. They do what they're supposed to do. They toe the line, they turn in their annual, report. They do all those things. But then you have the bad apples. And like any bad apple, it spoils the barrel. And so that's the challenge that we got. And so I believe that increased oversight and monitoring and then enforcement. And with the enforcement there has to be some penalties and some teeth, right? So not a parking ticket. It has to be something that painfully, similar to the way the guides out on the river, they get their first one and they get ejected for 2 days, 3 days. That costs them a bunch of money because now they have to cancel. They don't get the money, but they have to tell their clients, you're not fishing with me. The second time, they get like 10 days, I think. Third time, poof, you're out of the pool. And that's the kind of thing that I think would help clean up those bad actors that are out there. And unfortunately, and some of you know painfully well that I consider myself a victim of conditional use permit because the people don't follow the rules. And then they color outside the lines, like way outside the lines. And when they do that, then it muddies the process and it makes it very painful for the people. And okay, the people who live two doors down or 2 streets down, that doesn't matter to them. But the people who live there, and that's the thing we need to remember, is that it's the residents that live there in a rural residential area, and these people get a permit to not follow the rules. That's fine if they toe the line. But when they go outside the line and do all kinds of stuff, there's nothing to keep them from doing it. There's nothing to keep them from adding on and stuff. And I could go on, and I don't want to get into my personal issue, but there is some poster child situations that say why we need to get a handle on this. And I think it boils back to oversight and enforcement. And I don't know how to do that. You like to I used to tell my people, bring me solutions, don't just come whine to me, right? And so I'm not trying to whine, but trying to put out some information of what's going on out there and how to deal. A solution, I have a perfect, or not a perfect solution, but I do have a solution for some of that, and that is we have seasonal enforcement officers who are generally, young people who are involved in law enforcement in one way or another in school or whatever. They come in the summer and they, mainly for the dip netting, right? I mean, that's the main application that they get. They work under the auspices of the police department, and I don't know what their title or what their category is, but they are seasonal enforcement officers, and they go out there and they do stuff. Something like that you know, because I had this conversation just a little bit ago with, you know, with Chief David in the police department. Is like, well, a lot of our stuff works by complaint. Okay, that's fine, except for, you know, I feel like backed in a corner when I have to complain that here's a situation where someone is not following the rules and the deal. It's like, do I have to call and say this guy is speeding down the highway? No, they have patrols, and they pick those people up and they deal with them. Same thing as the seasonal enforcement officers. They go out there and, you know, check, deal, and most people everything's fine until it's not. And then, you know, they check a block and, you know, they deal with them. And so I don't want to ramble on, but that is one of the keyest things that I have seen in handling the conditional use permit process. You know, some of the violations, and I'll just go slightly off track. Some of the violations are, they get a conditional use permit and, you know, you talk about rezoning and you talk about, well, they're all doing it. Okay, if they're all doing it and everybody's straight and narrow, it's fine. But they get a conditional use permit and they think, well, now I can do anything. I can add this, I can add that, I can do that, I can do that, and then I can do that. And there's nobody to tell them no, right? And this is a little bit of a lick on the city, and this is a challenge for, you know, Terry Eubank in managing the city, is when you get a complaint, do something about it, right? Actually go do something about it. I don't know, I kind of, you know, went off in the weeds there a little bit, but that's kind of my frustration with the whole process.
No, and I think especially, I think everything that we saw up on there, the lodging and the guides and stuff like that, they're the only ones we really seem to have where we have conflict. I think that's, the rest of them are, you know, it's a daycare somewhere and it's like, that's not really a big thing, but
Yep.
You're right with that. And I know in the past, when somebody may call in for a noise complaint down there because they're still partying at midnight or 1 o'clock and the cops show up down there, they don't know that there's a conditional use permit attached to it. They just know there's a noise complaint. And so they go, okay, hey, got to shut her down. So it may not get full circle back that, hey, it's kind of violating the conditional use permit. So I mean, those are things, I guess, that are challenges that we probably should try to get our head wrapped around. I know from a couple years ago, last year seemed pretty quiet as far as complaints go and everything. So maybe they just didn't bother to complain. But from a couple years ago when it was, or 3 years ago even, when it was really getting out of hand, I mean, I think it's better, but I guarantee you it's not perfect. So I don't know, Kevin,
I can say that the city we are looking for some permitting software that would be basically all permits that touch the city. And it would be right now it's kind of, this department does this department does that. We work with Public Works, you know, for building permits. But there's not a lot of breaking down those silos. And I know the city is actively looking for a software solution, hopefully be putting out to bid soon, actually, to break down those barriers. And that, once we have that database up and running, the police would be able to see that there's a conditional use permit at this address, that there would be some cross-talking, I guess, between departments. That doesn't necessarily have to happen during business hours, because if you're getting a complaint at midnight, I'm not in my office, I hope. So, you know, they can't call and say, is there a CUP at, you know, such address on Engler? But our goal is to have that database so they can cross-reference it pretty quickly. And to address a comment, MJ, code changes could be a part of this. Whether it's land use table and adjusting what those are, the actual process of the CUP itself. There may be things in code that are more policy and not necessarily don't need to actually be codified, because different administrations might want to do things a little bit differently on a policy basis, not spelling out you have to dot your I's and cross your T's in code. Sometimes hamstrings the efforts we can do, but you just make that a policy. And to that end, I will say that in March, my department, we work with legal, and we work with the police department as well. We actually do have a new code enforcement policy and procedure here in the city. So when we get a complaint, It filters all the way down. It's pretty much a checklist. Did you do this, this, that? And, it gives deadlines. It gives exit ramps. So if we contact a property owner and say, hey, we received this complaint, but and they immediately come back and say, yes, we know our fence is down, we're gonna get it fixed. And they work with us, we can kind of get them off the track of going punitive. But it does also give us a way to become punitive should that we go that way. Once it gets to a certain level, I have to turn it over to the legal department because that's when they would potentially levy a fine that's allowed in code, all the way up to potential litigation if it were to go all the way. So we do actually now have a formal process. A lot of the old complaints, we went back through, re-noticed some people. Some people have already cleaned up the act. We do have our perennial problem children, as it were. But we're reaching that level where it's hitting that 60-day. And we can say, hey, we've contacted you, we've called you, mailed stuff to you, mailed it certified so that we know you got it or didn't get it, as the case may be in some. And at that point, we can say we have exhausted all of our options. It's time to take that next step and go with fines or something like that. Depending on the type of complaint, and then we also have 3 types of complaints. Is it an emergency, like life and safety? Is it something that's critical but not, imminent danger to somebody? And then is it something else that's, a nuisance, but it's not an emergency? So that'd be more like the fence down, whereas a car that's parked off the street but in the right of way that's been abandoned, especially in the winter where you're not allowed to park off the side of the street, we need those moved because people can't get through. And if, things get backed up, either the plows get damaged or emergency services can't get through. So that we do have those levels of severity, but it's now actually an approved policy all the way up through the city manager. So it is in place. So that is a very recent change that just happened, but it isn't moving forward.
So conditional use permit belongs to the property, or does it belong to the operator of the property? Like if you have you're renting a lodge, whose conditional use permit is it? Is it the owner of the lodge, or is it the person that's renting it and operating it?
It goes with the operator, but if they don't also own the land, they do have to get buy-in from the landowner.
And so the landowner can share their permit with the current code?
It would go with the operation. So if it doesn't automatically transfer is what I'm saying. So if, pick one random spot on Engler, that has a conditional use permit now, but someone wants to buy it and just use it as a single family residence or their own family spot, the CUP does not automatically transfer. They have to request it to transfer. But
My question is it's operating as a lodge or guide service or whatever, and then somebody else comes in and leases that property. It already has a conditional use permit for those services. Does the operator need to get it transferred into their name? Do they need their own permit?
yes, and those, when they do transfer, we've had some where a new lodge company A owned it and company B came in and said, we want to run the lodge. They do have to come back in front of this body to get it transferred. And that is specified in code as well. But it doesn't go with property because someone could sell the property but keep the operations going, with the new owner.
So
Go ahead.
how do you follow up on that when you know that there's people coloring outside the lines?
As we learned about it, there is a process also to revoke a CUP. So if we get word that something is happening, and we work with the borough very well, so they generally let us know. We can look at business licenses. That's one thing we do every year with our CUPs is look at business license. Are they in operation? And sometimes you'll see company A no longer has a business license that expired, let's say the end of 24. And we're like, okay, well, something's going on down there. Then we can search by address, and then generally you'll find the new owners. And if that is the case, then we have provisions where we will reach out and say, you have to get your CUP. You're not currently the owner of the CUP. You do need to come in front of this body, in front of a public hearing to get it transferred to you. We have, since I've been here, I've only been here 7 months. That hasn't happened yet. We've had a couple that have been transferred. But that is one of the things we have to do as part of the administration of a CUP, is to ensure that, do they have a business license that's active in the state? And are they paying their taxes to the borough? You know, are those accounts current as well? And then if they have a reasonable number of unreasonable number of complaints, if there's other issues with it, the Planning and Zoning Commission can ask me to do an investigation on this property, and I can bring all that information back, and it would be up to the commission. They do have the power to revoke that CUP and shut things down permanently with that particular business. So any parts of that code could possibly be tweaked, could be streamlined. The power is there, it's just a matter of whether or not it's been wielded, which, again, I'm too new to say. It hasn't since I've been here, but it doesn't mean it can't happen.
Kevin, that's a perfect segue into, okay, there have been permits transferred and, bounced around and everything else, whether they own it or not, whether they transfer it, whether they sell the property, and then the people to come in and they assume the permit. And my opinion on that is unacceptable. There has never been, that, to my knowledge, a public notice, like when you apply for a new one, get a public notice, they have a planning and zoning committee, that you go and make your decision, you pass that on to city council for approval or denial, and then it goes forward. I haven't seen that, and I have not been subject to one, but I know that some in our neighborhood that should have been in our radar zone, we should have been notified and didn't participate in that. Secondarily, and that's a sidebar discussion of that, is what do you do when someone applies for a conditional use permit, gets denied by this august body, gets appealed to the city council, they say no as well, and then the people go out and do it anyway. They start doing what they asked to do without any conditional use permit, but they're doing it. They're doing this activity out there.
I believe that's where the code enforcement would then, if it is denied, they do have the, because the CUP, the body that makes the final determination generally, is this body. It doesn't doesn't have to go to council out of here. They can go to the Board of Adjustments, so should we deny them and they don't agree with the decision, which we have had happen right before I got here, somewhere here in town, regarding a marijuana shop, I believe.
Or the other way too, we could approve it and still a party could appeal it to the Board of Adjustments, either way.
Either way.
Yeah.
So if there are more complaints, it could go, if there's enough like groundswell that people are like, absolutely not, we do not want this. There is also that avenue as well. Once the Board of Adjustments makes their decision, that's final for the city. If they say no or yes, whatever their decision is, that's what the decision is. Let's say it goes through us, we say no, it gets denied at the BOA as well. If they go and do it, that's where the code enforcement will come in place, and that's where the fines could be levied, and that's where you could go the legal litigation route. So there, is it a process? Yes. Does it take time? Yes. Would I want to see this in my backyard? Absolutely not. And as the planner for the city, I want this place to be the best it can be. But with private property rights, you can't just marshal in and say, nope, absolutely not, and put padlocks on everything. But there are provisions to get it to a point where it would not be a viable operation for them. If they're getting fined, a certain amount a day, those add up. And those can be put as a lien against the property, potentially, depending on what the courts do. At some point, something's got to give, and, most likely we would win out. that's why we want to make sure that we make this process the best that it can be, but we keep those guardrails in place. But also, we also have to look, you know, because we'll be starting our comprehensive plan rewrite here soon. It's 10 years old right now. So probably about this time next year, we'll be kicking that off. This discussion could help lead us into what does the new land use map look like for the city? You know, because in 10 years, some development has happened in some locations that we didn't think it was going to happen, and all of a sudden that was the new spot people wanted to be in. Other decisions or other areas, you know, nothing happened. And maybe it's not attractive for that land use that we thought it was going to be, but another land use might be appropriate. So I think if we have some of those harder conversations now, it'll make the whole process throughout the future. But I get it. Like, there will be people that'll say, I'll do what I want. It's my property. We do have provision. We do have a way to stop it, but it can't happen overnight, unfortunately. So it's kind of we'll keep their toes to the fire.
Understand, and that said, as long as the egg is broke, let's make an omelet. When you have existing situations like that, I mean, what's our recourse? Who do we, you know, as I've heard many times, you know, we work by file by complaint, right? So who do we complain to when we've got operators who have been denied conditional use permits and, you know, they just said, tough, and they've appealed, and they said, you know, they've stormed out of here saying they're going to sue the city. You know, I've seen at least 2 of those, and then they just go do what they want.
You're looking at the guy right there.
Yeah, by code, the planning director,
Okay,
my staff assists me, but the planning director is who you would complain to. There is a form on our website, or you can come in, you can call, you can email. Basically, we just need something that is documented to start the process. Our form can be submitted anonymously. It does say name, phone number, and email, but they're not required fields, so you can, just saying on the record, just. So it can be anonymous, but once that complaint's received, that's when we start digging in, and we look at, you know, what does the complaint say? We go look at it. You know, if someone's operating a business, that's usually pretty evident. So when we do a site visit, we're reasonably assured that something is going on that isn't supposed to be going on. And then from there, we gather more intel and we keep moving down that process for code enforcement that, like I said, could go all the way up to legal or potential litigation in the courts. That is far above my pay grade, but we do marshal it up to that level.
and so that begs the question. The complaint then turns it over into your world, and any enforcement, follow-on legal activity becomes you guys, not us?
Yes, once, so I'm on both sides of the coin. I get to see the CUPs, whether they get approved or denied, and then I get the code enforcement on the other side. So I get the whole coin, so I'm like a leprechaun. But once we get their complaint, it falls on the city. So it's my department until I turn it over to legal, at which point the city attorney could, if he determines it's worth it, you know, it's in the best interest of the city, he would take it to court. But oftentimes, by the time you get to that level and you start threatening fines, a lot of people start backing down, because the one thing people don't like getting, or, you know, getting impacted is their pocketbook. And that's generally where the buck stops. Not always, but that's why we have provisions to go further.
I'm sure we'll be talking more this next summer.
No, it is, I mean, that, like I said, the rest of them, you know, the marijuana ones and all that are pretty easy to keep a lid on. The guides and the lodging is the one that I think is the one that needs all the attention for the most part, probably. So, and like I said, I think this is just a good way to start having a discussion on the disconnects that we have to try to figure out how to make it more streamlined, so that when that complaint gets, or like I said, and it's going to take a lot of, I mean, it's going to be you guys that they're not going to have time to drive down there every day and every night and check. So it's going to be some kind of a complaint driven thing. But then as long as you've done your part, then the city just needs to make sure they bring the full force of what they can do and check into it and clean it up as soon as possible, I think is what the goal would be.
Yeah, and one last thing is, because I did mention in the slideshow, any potential rezoning does not necessarily have to be a zero sum, so it's not all or nothing. So it can't be spot zoning, you can't say this parcel this parcel that. You know, there has to be some method to the madness, but, you know, if a collection of, let's say, landowners on Angler, for instance, say, you know, like that whole middle portion really doesn't have a lot of CUPs, if any, there might be one. If those landowners wanted to, they have the right in code to request to be rezoned to a more restrictive zone. So they could go from rural residential, which they are now, to rural residential 1, like the neighborhood to the north. There are certain provisions that has to be at least an acre of land, and it has to be reasonable. Like, you're not going to automatically just drop heavy industrial in the middle of a rural residential area. But if it does make sense, and something like that would, if the landowners wanted more restrictive zoning, they could. So, but that also, on the flip side, some of the other ones could say, hey, we already have, let's say, 10 CUPs along maybe 8 or 9 parcels. We want to rezone to working waterfront. You know, it could go either way, but it isn't necessarily zero, you know, all or nothing. It could be a mix, but that would be up to the landowners, it would be up to this body. I just wanted to bring it to the attention that we do have some hot spots in the city. But again, we also want to keep the guardrails up. So where do we strike that balance?
We're well aware.
He
Glenn.
just reminded me, what was it, they switched to rural residential 2?
I don't remember, how did that rezone go? It went,
Or R1,
Okay.
okay. Well, that's where I remember there was
went
a
from
limit on.
rural residential
on
to
the
rural
C-
residential 1, yeah.
But that's where there was the limit on the CUPs.
Oh, maybe so. Yep.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, okay, that's what
Right.
it was, yeah. Yep.
But I guess to put a bow on it, I'll go back, I'll do a deep dive into all of our active ones, cross-reference anything that we have any code enforcement issues with, see where our problem children are. And then if this body wants, I can also start going through and making potential suggestions, so we, because I'd say another way to potentially head off some of these would also be to look at our land use table, which would have to, unfortunately, eventually for the update to the comprehensive plan, and kind of making that, making some of those decisions that we can recommend to council to say, yeah, this is appropriate for a rural residential, or this isn't, instead of a lot of conditional, maybe putting a few more restrictions on some of the different zones. But bring down that number from like 579, bring that down slightly to a slightly more manageable number.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan of attack, and then, I mean, somehow, I mean, just, I don't know how you get the message out there to everybody that, making sure that they're following their rules, because like I said, I know there's a lot of times where it becomes a bit of a gray area for transferring and things like that. Sometimes it become a deal, but yeah, I think for the most part, I mean, complaint driven for sure. It's just going to always be, that's going to be part of it. I think, you can oversight as much as you can without being able to be out there in a ghillie suit in the woods sometime watching what's going on. But, like I said, I know it's part of what you want to do is to make sure we get this thing running as smoothly as possible, and good first step anyway. Commissioner Reveal, anything? Just absorbing all the information, huh?
Right. I did have one question about that particular neighborhood. There's no HOAs or any other ways to work on that?
I don't think so.
In the Angler neighborhood?
Correct.
Or the Basin View neighborhood?
Angler.
Angler, no, there's not. Basin View has an HOA, and the Lake at Kenai is in the process of getting an HOA.
And so there's nobody on Angler that's interested in starting one?
I doubt it, because there's a mixture of seasonal people and permanent residents, and they are like they don't want.
Understood. Well, it was a shot.
Good idea.
All right. I think we are good to go then for now. Thanks for coming in, guys. Always good to see you. We got to get some kind of controversy so I can see you guys. I don't see you anymore. That's true. Yeah. I would bet probably somewhere, huh? You're going to go do some work and come back with something, right?
Yes, it'll be another public hearing, so it'll require notice, so it'll be, at the very least a month, probably a month and a half. We also know that summer's right around the corner, so trying to get people in here will be like, but
And the thing is, absolutely appreciate everything you guys are doing, all of you, and appreciate the opportunity to do this. As you and I spoke earlier, a week ago, a month ago, but that it's good to do this, it's good to get going, it's good to make it an interaction process,